Today's scripture reading comes from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verses 1 and 4 through 7. These are the words of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the remaining elders among the exiles, and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. The letter said, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." This is the word of the Lord.
Pray with me. Begin if you would, please. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Do you all, by any chance, drive rental cars differently than you do your own car? Is that something? Do we have any honest people here? Just curious. It is hard for me to remember that rental cars are not my own personal race cars. That is a true, this is confession, that is a true discipline for me. Right, in my own car, I would say, wait until there was an entrance into a parking lot or, shopping center or something like that. In a rental car, I'll just drive over the curb. Because I can. It's a rental. It doesn't matter. I have actually gone, this is true, airborne in a Ford Focus, like 4 wheels off the ground at the same time. For me, in a rental car, speed bumps are no longer mechanisms to slow down my driving. They are Dukes of Hazzard launch pads. It's amazing what I can do in a rental car. I want you to know. Debbie and I are neat freaks at home. Like, it is really, Debbie is. Debbie is a neat freak. We are fairly clean at home, okay? Organized, like, the house is typically very much in order. When we go to a motel room, like, we open our bags and the clothes just explode everywhere. Like, there's nothing organized. It just, boom. Like, I put on deodorant and then I just drop it where I was. It's a rental. I can do whatever I want. It's a rental. This is temporary. Some of you are looking at me with such faces of disappointment right now. It really stings. If you need to talk about it, just email me at This is our second week on looking forward, on vision, on going somewhere on purpose. And last week we talked a little more about an individualized version of what it meant to walk somewhere with vision. We talked about those 4 steps that you can pretty much count on, that there is a moment of prophetic understanding where you know what ought to be, and then it's typically followed by total vulnerability where you have to make a move, but you have no idea if it's going to play out like you wanted it to. And then you can pretty much count on an uphill climb that we never counted on. It's hard work, but if we persevere through that, what we talked about was eventually there is this process of whittling down this vision into unflinching focus. To something that matters, to something that you know is right. And that was kind of how we looked at vision and going somewhere on purpose like I said, more individually. This week I'd like to talk about where we are going as a church, as a people, as a community. But first, as usual, I'd like us to have a little context for this passage that we just read. Just curious, when you hear that we are going to, and this may not be the case, this may just be my background, when you hear that we are going to read something from the book of Jeremiah, like Jeremiah 29, oh, there it is, my people. It's just the famous verse in that chapter. It's the famous verse in this book, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. It just makes you feel so warm inside, so snuggly. It's just good, which is why 80% of us have it somewhere on a wall in our house. Typically cross-stitched, which I tried when I was younger, but it was the worst Mother Day present ever. Here's the problem. Have you ever read the 2 to 3 verses that lead right up to verse 11? Because they change things. It's different. It's a different scene maybe than we were expecting. Jeremiah is actually scolding people for listening to false prophets. False prophets who only prophesied what the people wanted to hear. Those warm and snuggly things. Because, if you'll remember last week we talked about Nehemiah had been written while the Israelites, the Hebrews, were in exile, and they were slowly making their way back to build up these walls. This was earlier in the process. This was really right after they were first brought into exile by the Babylonians. And so these people, their city has been decimated, Jerusalem has been decimated, they have been dragged out of their city, and they have been brought into this other country, and prophets are doing what I don't blame them for wanting to do, which is comfort a traumatized people. And so they're saying, listen, it's going to be okay. I've heard from God, and this whole thing, 2 years tops. Don't even unpack your bags. It's going to be okay. These Babylonians are going to get wiped out by some other mean country, and we're going to get released, and we're going to get to go back to Jerusalem, back to our homes, back to where everything is okay. Don't get comfortable. And I don't blame them for wanting to do that. I don't blame them for wanting to comfort the hurting people. I just had my first week of CPE, clinical pastoral education. You work at a hospital, and I'm at Jefferson Hospital down in Philly, and it's a teaching hospital, and you get a lot of pretty rough stuff. And I saw a lot of intense things last week. And the very first situation I was in, a mother had just gotten word that her son was going to die. And she was surrounded by 25 friends and family, and I watched every single one of them look at her and say, he's going to be fine. No, he's not. And I resonated with that. That's the only thing I wanted to say to that mother. She was traumatized. She was devastated, and the only thing she wants is for her son to live, and so that's what everybody told her. What I'm trying to learn is what Jeremiah did, which is to look at somebody who is devastated and tell them the truth, and to tell them the truth with a plan, somehow that was hopeful. Jeremiah recognized the cold hard truth, and that is they're going to be there a while. There was no way around it. But he didn't just say, listen, you guys are idiots if you're listening to all these people. And you actually think you're just going to stay here for 2 years or 1 year or whatever it's going to be. He didn't just call them stupid. He didn't just tell them how they were wrong. He offered a plan to move forward. He offered a vision. And I think it's a pretty radical one. Settle into the land of your captors. Invest in the country that killed your families and made you all slaves. Make it a better one. Buy a little real estate. Plant some crops. Have some weddings and some kids. Actively work for the betterment of the city. Ignore those who flippantly tell you that this is all going to be over soon. It's all going to go away is not a plan. It is an empty, feel-good lie. And so this passage meant a lot for me as I'm trying to learn what it means to sit in a hospital and face people who are facing real hard truths and offer truth but hope. I don't know how to do it yet. I know it's what I'm going to spend my next 4 months learning to do. But I think Jeremiah gives us a pretty good example of how to start. We do a disservice when we jump to 29:11. It's good news, and it's true, and it's right, and I believe it. But we have some marching orders in the meantime, and we would do wrong to just pass over those. So while they say, max 2 years, you're fine, Jeremiah says, let's just count. Let me read these real fast, this passage. Build houses. That's the first instruction, which typically, if you're going to stay there 2 weeks, you don't build a home. Next one, plant gardens and eat what the gardens produce. So now we're talking about a full season. That's how long I want you to stay there. Next one, take wives and have sons and daughters. Now we're talking about a generation. Full generation, I want you to stay there. Next line, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage. Now we're talking about another generation. It keeps going. That they may bear sons and daughters. Now we're talking about a third. That is hard to hear if you've just been dragged out of your home. But this is his instruction. For those of you who are students, I think that this might be really, really important to hear. And not because, let's not, New Jersey is not exile, okay? Let's be careful there. But whether you're going to be here for 3 years or 30, I would say settle in. Invest. This is not a rental. To treat these years as if they were a rental is to be wasteful. To never hang your curtains is to allow you to treat your community as something less than your community. This is your community. Bear down, invest, make it yours. That is the call of Jeremiah 29. To live everywhere as if you were going to be there for generations. It changes things. It changes how we look at our neighbor. And it's probably not very easy to pull off all the time to invest in the welfare of the city who destroyed your home. I don't know what kind of grace that would take, but it's more than I have. It was a long time before Jesus said, pray for your enemies. As a matter of fact, I think when Jeremiah said it, it was really, really practical. I think Jesus said it because that is what we are called to do as we emulate the grace that God gave us, who loved us long before we knew how to love God. Jeremiah seems to be doing it for some practical reasons. In the city's success, you will find your own success. He says it outright. And what's crazy is that this has actually been proven in study after study after study. Let me just invite a couple seminarians. If you want to start passing out, we have some seeds for you. Just feel free to pass those out like an offering plate, except you can take out for a second. There's a couple things. First of all, there's something called the broken window effect. I don't know if you all have heard about the broken window effect, but sometimes you got neighborhoods they're kind of on their decline, and you've got an abandoned building, and somebody will just one day take a rock and throw it through a window. It happens. And over again, you can watch systematically after that first rock goes to the window, another rock will go through soon thereafter, and then another, and then graffiti starts. But once the first window breaks, that building goes downhill fast. And so they did a study. They started putting in community gardens. This is not the whole community, this is 10 people. 10 people get together, and we're not even saying raising food. Like, they're not eating strawberries. They're just planting flowers that are pretty. And they start cultivating this little area, and they plant flowers, and they grow. And over and over and over again, you would watch people from the neighborhood, people who weren't even invested in these community gardens, who would just inadvertently, without even thinking, walk by and pick up a piece of trash. Because somebody had been investing in their community, and without even knowing it, everybody kind of does the same thing and leans in. And you watch communities begin to get better that were falling apart. And it's flowers. 10 people planting flowers. So then, just a few years ago, they did a huge study on the health and social index of countries around the world. And they did a couple things, because health and social index, there's all of these things in terms of education and health, in terms of drug abuse, imprisonment, obesity, mental health, social mobility, trust is one of the factors. They study all of these countries, okay? And they can't find any rhyme or reason for why some countries do well and some countries do poorly. Like, some of the countries who did really well were very rich, and some of the countries who did just as well were very poor. They couldn't find any rhyme or reason until they started comparing, of all things, income gaps. They started looking at the top 20% income and the bottom 20% in every country. And the larger the income gap, the worse the country did on health, every time. And the smaller the income gap, the better the country did on health, every time. The outcomes were consistent and significantly worse in a country with a wider income gap. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. There were literally rich countries who had shorter life expectancies than poor countries because of income gap. They can't even figure out why. There's a whole book trying to figure out why. It's actually, you want to look it up, it's called The Spirit Level. And they're coming up with reasons, trying to study why. All they know is it's true. I think about those of us who hate our jobs. We have some boss, or we hate school, or we have some teacher that gives us a hard time. What if we invest in the next 5 years in making that business or that class or whatever it is the best it could possibly be, even knowing that it's that boss or that professor or that whoever it is that might get the credit? What would happen? Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you. Pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. Two of our hopes for the past few years have been sort of building a space where young adults can engage in worship, and creating a space where good Christian community happens. And those have been two of our big focuses, and I think that those have happened in pretty incredible ways. Now, we are starting to look outward. As this year begins, we're starting to look at our surrounding community. We have said, listen, we needed to take care of ourselves, and we needed to take care of how we loved on one another, and we have done that, and now it's time to look outside of these walls. And Kinda often has this little dream, and she says, I dream of a time when there are social problems in the community, there's something going wrong, and everybody just naturally says, you know what we need? We need to find some Christians, because they're the ones that solve problems like this. This is our dream for this community, that as we have taken care of our relationships with each other, we look outside of these walls and we say, how do we pray for this community? How do we seek the welfare of this city, so that when this city hurts, when this town hurts, they say, I know what we should do. We should find some Christians. So does everybody have their seed? Everybody got one there? Just so you know, that's a watermelon seed. Aida did a great work. She carved up the watermelon this morning, and our kitchen looks like there was it just looks like a crime scene, frankly. Do whatever you want to do with that seed. Put it on your dashboard. Put it in your pocket. Plant it. Do whatever it takes to remind yourself that this is our community. This is not a rental car. It is ours to make better. Seek the welfare of the city I have sent you to, and pray for the Lord, to the Lord on its behalf. For its welfare, you will find your welfare. Amen?
Amen.